Oliver Cowdery was a school teacher in Palmyra, New York. And as he was a school teacher, he had the opportunity of living with the Joseph Smith Sr. family. While living with the family, he learned about young Joseph, who had moved to a place called Harmony, Pennsylvania. As a result, when the school season was over that winter, we get Oliver Cowdery leaving with one of Joseph's brothers, Samuel Smith, to now work his way down to Harmony, Pennsylvania, about 130 miles away, so that he could meet this man who claimed that he had gold plates. The date that Oliver Cowdery met Joseph Smith was April 5th of 1830. 2 days later, Oliver Cowdery had made the decision that he would remain behind in Harmony, Pennsylvania, as Samuel Smith will eventually return home. What is Oliver going to be doing? Oliver has concluded that he would like to be the scribe now for Joseph's continual translation of the Book of Mormon. Oliver Cowdery then becomes the main scribe to the Book of Mormon as we now know it. For Oliver, years later, he described what it was like to be the scribe for Joseph Smith. He said, "These were the days never to be forgotten. To sit under the voice now that now communicates with God and to now assist in bringing forth the Book of Mormon as he now writes it down as Joseph dictates the words." Well, during that time of translation, we come to the date of May 15th, 1829. At this point, you get Oliver Cowdery and Joseph Smith very interested in the authority to act in the name of God. It will be on that date, May 15th, 1829, that Joseph and Oliver will go out to the Susquehanna River that ran through the property that Joseph had there in Harmony, Pennsylvania. And on that date, while kneeling in prayer, appearing to these men will be a man known as John the Baptist. You may recall John the Baptist from times ago. John the Baptist was the very man who had baptized Jesus Christ. John the Baptist, as a child, was taken by his mother Elizabeth out into the wilderness area of Judea. And there he will grow, and there he will also begin his ministry. And you'd say, for John the Baptist, we know that he had a tragic ending in his mortal life, but on May 15th, 1829, John the Baptist will appear as a resurrected being, and at this point will now appear to Joseph and to Oliver Cowdery, and will give these men the right to now hold what is called the Aaronic priesthood, or lesser priesthood, but nevertheless, you'd say these men now had the authority to act in the name of God. With the authority now to act in the name of God, they will begin baptizing others. We know that the first person baptized after Joseph and Oliver will be Samuel Smith. And perhaps it's no coincidence that Samuel Smith will ultimately become the first missionary for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. They will continue to baptize others. You would say that's the good news for all the others, but apparently it was not good news for a man named Nathaniel Lewis. Nathaniel Lewis was a local Methodist minister in town. Nathaniel Lewis, in addition, was the brother-in-law of Isaac Hale. As the brother-in-law, he makes his living as a minister. Suddenly he begins to notice that not as many people are attending church. As he visits with them, he will discover the reason why. Joseph Smith is still working, looking in stones, translating the Book of Mormon. He will also discover that some of his flock have now united with Smith. He will share that information with his brother-in-law, Isaac Hale, the father of Emma. Between the two men, they now conclude that Joseph Smith and Oliver should literally lose their lives. They plan that they will do something called tar and feathering. Tarring was a form of death. How it was done, it actually began in England in the 12th century. In England in the 12th century, for those that would have been convicted of a crime worthy of death, they could choose to be hung until dead, burned at the stake, or tarred and feathered. Tarred and feathered had everything to do with pine tar. And what they would do is they would put the tar in the victim's mouth. The victim would then suffocate. He would lose the ability to breathe. And you'd say, but in the case of Joseph and Oliver, for the two men, then Nathaniel Lewis and Isaac Hale, the plan was they would tar and feather them, which meant they would take the tar and splash the body, and the feathers would show they mocked the men. Now, as Joseph and Oliver got word of a mob action then materializing, beginning to form, their conclusion was they needed to move on. In other words, leave the area quickly. The question was, where could they go? Back in Palmyra, Joseph was not able to translate any of the Book of Mormon. And so he'd say, because of mob actions back then. So the question was now where to go. For Oliver Cowdery, he was familiar with a people named Whitmers that lived in a place called Fayette, New York. For Oliver Cowdery, he will now write to his friend David Whitmer to ask David Whitmer would he be willing to come and to pick up he and Joseph, and in addition, could they then stay in the Whitmers' home? The reason being is that they were near the end of the translation and obviously needed a safe place to continue translating the Book of Mormon. Well, for David Whitmer, he will come and actually provide transportation. But before he arrives, Joseph and Oliver were so worried for their lives from the fact you've got this kind of vigilante, mobocratic feeling in town that Joseph and Oliver will already begin walking towards the Whitmers' house. Now, once you get Joseph and Oliver in the Whitmers' home, the translation will continue. The translation will continue then on the upper level of the home. When they had neared then the end of the translation, there was much talk about there was a need for 3 witnesses to be able to testify that they had had the opportunity of seeing the gold plates. It will be at this time that 3 men received an amazing privilege. The 3 men were Martin Harris, Oliver Cowdery, and David Whitmer. The privilege given to these 3 men was to have literally an open vision in which they saw the angel Moroni and they saw the plates from which Joseph Smith had been translating the Book of Mormon. Their testimony can be found in every copy of the Book of Mormon, from its first printing in 1830 to the millions and millions of printings that have occurred since that time in the number of copies. Well, okay, once you've got the witnesses to the Book of Mormon, we're going to find that Joseph, once he's back in Palmyra, will actually show 8 other men together then a copy of the plates. Now, as he shows them the plates, these men were allowed to hold them. Obviously, they're lifting one to another. They are outside of the Smith farmhouse there in Palmyra. And what you get is you not only get those 3 witnesses, but you get 8 witnesses who will now forever have their testimony also in the Book of Mormon, that they know that the Book of Mormon is true. They have seen the plates, and then, of course, in the case of the 3 witnesses, they have also seen the angel Moroni. Well, okay, with that, it's now time to publish this book. The question is, who will publish it? Today, when we talk about books and book publishers, they are plenty. You can self-publish, you can do a type of vanity press, you can look for great publishing houses literally throughout the world. But back in the time of the 1829, 1830, publishers were few, especially to publish a book where you'd say it's ultimately 500 pages. This is a time, especially in the United States, when a typical family had only one book, and that was the Bible. So the question is, could a typical family actually afford a second book? You do have some families that have school primers for children, but actually it was more rare than typical. As Joseph began to look for a publisher, he tried in a place called Rochester, New York. He had no success there. He even went to his hometown of Palmyra, and the feeling in Palmyra was no. In fact, you actually get ministers from the churches in Palmyra circulate petitions requesting, and people would sign their name, saying that they agreed they would never buy a copy of the Book of Mormon, and they also would then use their power to make sure anyone they knew or had influence over would not buy that book either. Joseph Smith was in a difficult spot. In other words, he had used all of his efforts to be able to translate this book, had faced great problems in so doing, and now you come to the very time he needs a publisher, and the consistent answer was no.